So I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody wearing something from another culture, and it's not so much the people that wear it that are the problem. It's when it goes mainstream and then they'll put certain women on a pedestal and call them, oh wow, like they are the pioneers of this long existing trend that has been existing for thousands and thousands of years in certain cultures, never been appreciated before, never been put in the mainstream. And the women or men who, traditionally wear these cultural looks and, they don't get celebrated. They're not on glossy magazines being called the trendy. It's the same theme all the time. It's like there's still a look, put it on somebody who they feel more comfortable because that's, I suppose they believe that the audience would feel. And the audience it just doesn't even work that way because that's how we love different cultures because we appreciate it on other people. But I think when you steal it and you rename it, rebrand it, don't even give the credit as to who it came from, it's incredibly disrespectful. It's incredibly tone deaf. And it's an example of racism. And people often think of racism as like, negative words that you could say about another person or, somehow discriminating, but actually cutting people out of their own traditions and their own culture and then giving it to somebody else and giving them the credit and then celebrating them. That is racism. So yeah, and I think where do you draw the line? I think celebrate the culture and involving the people from said culture and making it a trend. Don't try to whitewash it to make it more palpable for an audience.
Hi, my name is Nadia Nagamootoo, business psychologist, coach, speaker and founder of Avenir Consulting, which creates organisational growth and success via inclusion and diversity. We've been discussing the benefits that diversity brings to companies' bottom line performance for decades with more and more evidence. But there are so many questions organisations still have about how to achieve it. How do you create a culture where people feel valued for their uniqueness and the qualities they bring? I believe it's crucial to the future success and sustainability of every organisation that they find the answer to this question to make sure that each employee is not only supported but also appreciated. With this podcast, I aim to get some of the key challenges to creating inclusive workplaces out in the open and start uncovering the solutions to embracing a culture that cares for everyone. I'm going to be having conversations with some of the most inspiring people in different countries and across industries who are pushing the boundaries on inclusion and diversity in the workplace, from topics such as parenting in the workplace, ethnicity, age, gender, mental health, and all things inclusion. I want to create a movement to change society through sharing life experiences and creating more empathy and connection. Why care? I believe that once we have organisations and societies that accept and value everyone for who they are, we become healthier, happier and better in our roles both inside and outside work. Hello, and welcome to episode 45 of Why Care. My name is Nadia Nagamootoo and I am your host. It's not often you hear the words sexual health and fashion in the same sentence, but the fabulous Sarah Mulindwa pulls it off with both beauty and style. Sarah is a sexual health advisor and educator, TV presenter and radio personality. With over 17 years as a qualified nurse, she's been practicing as a senior sexual health and HIV nurse for over 13 years, having trained at the world-renowned clinic, 56 Dean Street in Soho, London. She's best known as the witty and glamorous nurse presenter on Channel 4's hit show, The Sex Clinic, where she's part of a team of sexual health experts who cut through Britain's sex secrets. Alongside this nursing and sexual health educator career, she is also well known in the creative industry as a fashion stylist and radio presenter. In this episode, Sarah shares the diversity and inclusion challenges within the fashion industry, including calling out instances of cultural appropriation. We also discuss the discrimination in the film and media industries faced by women as their bodies go through menopause and change with age. Sarah shares her work with young people, particularly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, to provide them with access to vital information around dating, sex, sexual health, grooming, and more. She also shares the incredible work she's doing in Uganda to make the conversation around sexual health less taboo and help educate and empower people. I know you're going to love this conversation. Enjoy. Sarah, I am so excited to have you on Why Care. Thank you so much for saying yes and joining me.
Oh, you're so welcome, Nadia. I know we've been speaking about this for weeks now. We're finally here, so I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is an Athena effect relationship because We met only in mid-March at the Dame Kelly Holmes's kind of women's empowerment event. Yeah. And I really appreciated, our conversation, even though it was very short over lunch, just that your presence, or there's your aura, there's something about you that I really want to get to know you. And so I'm delighted that we're having this conversation and I get to know you a little bit better through our conversation today.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, seeing you at the event, because I got more of an insight into you. I was the lucky one between the two of us, because I got more of an insight into you when you were part of the panel and giving your talk. And I just thought, oh my gosh, she's incredible. Like, it just opened up my eyes to just a different world and a different approach to looking at the workforce and how women can approach it and how you work to better that and make it more diverse. And yeah, I just thought it was brilliant. So when you came up to me, I was like, oh my God, I was a bit of a fangirl. And then when you suggested, oh, let's keep in touch, I was like, yes, let's swap Instagrams. And yeah, 3 months later, here we are. So yeah, it's incredible. It's a nice sort of all round experience now.
Yeah, I know. And so for those who don't know you now, you've been on TV, you're a very well known person. However, they might not know fully your background. And actually, it's a really fascinating background because you sort of started in health and moved into fashion and now but still working in health and bridged the two. I'd love for you to share a little bit, highlights of that career, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a funny one because I've done so many different things that on paper are just not related at all. But yeah, like you said, I somehow managed to try and do all of those things. So yeah, so a lot of people would know me from TV. So I used to do a show for Channel 4 called The Sex Clinic, which I found out is going to be airing again soon, which is great. And I did that through my background as a nurse. So what I studied at university was nursing, and I worked in acute medicine for the first 5 years of my career. I've been a nurse for 17 years now. So for the first 5 years, I specialized in acute medicine. And after that, I decided, in 5 years within my nursing career, I thought, you know what, I really want to try something else. And I started my training as a nurse when I was 17. I was a year younger than you would normally go to university. So by the time I was in my early 20s, I was already, a qualified nurse. I had this proper profession that was very, serious and, especially for a young girl. But I always wanted to work in fashion. And this was before, we had your Instagram and your Twitter and social media in general. So fashion was always something that I was passionate about, but I never saw it as a feasible career path just because I didn't know anyone in fashion around me, and it just seemed a little bit unattainable. And I still loved being a nurse. So after 5 years of acute medicine, I decided that I wanted to specialize as a nurse. And I thought, what can I do that I've not done before, that I don't have that much knowledge in, and I'd love to sort of grow in that field, and what my sort of interest in as a nurse. And then a colleague of mine at the time was like, why don't you do sexual health? There's a clinic that's part of the trust and it's off-site. It's a clinic in Soho. You do sort of normal hours, quote unquote, because at this time I was a nurse for 5 years. So, I was doing weekends, I was doing nights. So I was 21, working night shifts. All my friends would be in the beer garden in the summer. And, it was quite a full on thing. So I thought, I need something that's a little bit more chilled, a bit more laid back. And at the same time, I thought I'm really going to go for this whole fashion thing. So then I decided to specialize in sexual health, and I absolutely loved it. It was completely different to anything that I did on the wards. I learned so much. I did all my trainings in-house, and I decided, I think this is where my niche is in my nursing career. So I stuck to my sexual health, advanced in that, got promoted to a senior nurse, did outreach services with young people, sex workers, people in the LGBTQI community, and just a variety of work that, is so unique and so special and just very exciting all the time, which I loved. And then in the middle of all of that, I launched my career in fashion, and I worked as a stylist. I did red carpet as a celebrity stylist. I worked as a fashion editor for 8 years. And then that sort of took me into presenting. So then I ended up doing a radio show, for a local radio station. And the show was all about fashion and anything that was trendy. So we'd go and we'd do live shows at Fashion Week. And then from that's kind of how I started to become known within the media space. And then everyone knew me as a fashion insider. I was a stylist. I was at front row at red carpets. I was going to all these cool events. And then, you get your picture taken, you get in the press, and people just started to know me as like the fashion girl kind of thing. And then
Yeah.
Yeah, and so and I loved it because I was doing both. I was a part-time nurse doing all my sexual health and still doing that whilst also building my career in fashion. And it was a lovely balance. And I love that I've got to do all the things that I'm passionate about simultaneously. And then I got approached by Channel 4, and a friend of mine who works in casting at the time, she knew somebody who was working on the sex clinic, and she said, "Oh, Sarah, there's this Channel 4 working on this new show. It's all about sexual health and dating and relationships. And they're looking for a presenter, and they're looking for a nurse, a health advisor and a doctor to be a bit like embarrassing bodies, but specifically for sexual health." And she said, "Well, you're a presenter and you're a sexual health nurse, so this is great." So I thought, wow, never in a million years did I ever think that I'd be able to marry my two professions together. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background. It's very varied.
It is. And actually what I'd love to do is delve into both aspects of your, I suppose, the industries that you work in. So both fashion and health and sexual health in our conversation, because there's so much around diversity, equity, inclusion that's wrapped in both of those industries. So to kick off, let's start with the fashion industry, because for me, on the outside, so I'm not big on the fashion, and I don't read fashion magazines, right? So I'm very much on the outside of this industry, okay? And all I have seen really is the film Devil Wears Prada. And that's my insight.
I think they're doing a remake of that as well. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, what a fabulous film. From a diversity, equity and inclusion lens, when I watch it now, I'm like, oh my gosh, this industry is shocking. How elitist, how kind of all about, what you look like, whether your face fits. Is it like that? Certainly historically been typically less diverse models in the top models. If you look at their sort of diversity characteristics, it's been less diverse. Do you see that improving? What's it like on the inside?
Yeah, so I mean, I started in the fashion industry it must be 12 or 13 years ago now. And within that time, so much has changed. So I started at a very pinnacle time during the fashion industry, because I think it was just before social media was a thing. So before to get into the fashion industry, and the reason why I never really pursued a career pathway in that direction was because I never saw people who looked like me. And like you said, it is very elitist, and you have to be from a certain background. There's a lot of nepotism involved as well. And careers in fashion are traditionally reserved for sort of white middle class people. So if you're a person of color from a working class background like myself, you're not really going to see anyone that reflects or represents you in the fashion industry. I mean, you can open up magazines and see campaigns and you can see diversity in that, but I wasn't going in. I mean, I've done a little bit of modeling. I've done it here and there. If somebody approaches me and says, "Oh, I would like to do it," great. But I always wanted to work behind the scenes. I never had any interest in sort of being at the forefront. I always wanted to be a stylist, to dress people for, magazines and red carpets and that kind of thing. That was always my passion. And so when I was doing my research, there was very few people who looked like me. And the ones who did worked within sort of specific spaces. So like within sort of the R&B and hip hop world. And I saw a lot of the stylists that were there, then they looked like me. But it was like you had to sort of be within your community and then thrive there. It wasn't just like, oh, you can just pick up any glossy magazine off the shelf and see someone that looked like you. So if you think about, your top magazines that we can all think of, there's just not that many people. And when you look at the editors and the deputy editors and the people that own it, there is a sort of theme. So I'd say for sure there historically has been that. And again, it's just because it is an elitist industry and it is sort of reserved. There's not that much money in the fashion industry. And a lot of people think, oh, you work in fashion, you make loads of money. It's like you're either making a lot of money or you're not making any money at all, essentially. It takes a big jump. And then, it's very fickle. Unfortunately, people think, oh, people in fashion can be a bit, snobby and a bit snooty. To be honest, I never had a terrible experience in that. And I think it's probably my approach to it. But there is that thing of it is very cutthroat and people will sell their grandmother to get to the top and that kind of thing. So it is sort of cutthroat in that way. But what I would say is and like I said, I started about 12, 13 years ago in the industry. And when you look at it now, and I think that is the beauty and the power of social media, is that everyone has a voice now. Everyone has a platform. So now, even though I don't work sort of within the fashion industry in the way I used to, now I'm sort of more because I did all my graft of dragging suitcases and setting up shoots and doing all of that. So now I just sort of attend the events and just have a good time. Like I don't want to sort of go back to being a stylist as such, but so now I work with brands in a different capacity and that kind of thing. And now you see more representation. You see, and social media. Before there was only sort of a handful of ways to get into the fashion industry. Whereas now you don't need to depend on an internship at a magazine, which is so hard to get. You don't need to depend on, having an auntie who happens to work for this person or, your uncle's a photographer or this, because not everyone has those contacts.
Right.
So now you can create your own community within social media. And we see it now, like all the time. That is, now you've got influencers who sort of do their own thing. Brands notice them. And because of equity and diversion and inclusion, now, everyone now knows that actually if you don't represent everybody, you're going to fall behind in terms of, your growth and all the rest of it. Because now it's more than ever. I think we live in such a world where we're much more connected than we used to. We understand the plight and the struggles that other people go through, whether it's because of your race, whether it's because of your body type, whether it's because of your age, all these things. And we're so more in tune with other people's experiences. And that's what social media has done. It's really given everyone a voice to say, you know what, this is not okay. I want to be seen. And representation is so important. So look at somebody that looks like you. It gives you that confidence. It makes you think, do you know what? If Nadia could do that, I could do that. Or if Sarah could do that, she looks like me. She comes from a similar background to me. She's from a working class background, or she's this or she's that. Then it makes you feel like, yeah, you can. And maybe looking back at it now, if there was that representation before, perhaps I probably would have taken a career in fashion more seriously. Like, actually, this is attainable, whereas it wasn't before. But at the same time, I always wanted to be a nurse before I wanted to work in fashion. So for me, it sort of worked out in a great way. In the time in which I went into the fashion industry was great. It was just before social media took off, and then it did, and then I benefited from that. But at the same time, I also, went to university, and I'm so glad that I did have like a proper profession and a career outside of fashion, because it is very fickle. It's not, nothing's guaranteed in it. So I always had something else to fall back on. So I'm glad that everything worked out the way it did for me.
Yeah. So there's something there about the change that's happened. And you're saying it's because the industry itself has recognized actually we need to be more representative here. Do you still, despite the drive for more diversity and to have more representation of people in the industry, not just models, but also stylists and other people working in the industry, do you still experience bias? Have you had any personal kind of experience or story that you can share that says actually there's still work to be done here?
Yeah, I think when it comes to, every brand, every organization is now very good at understanding the sort of visual representation that's needed. So if a brand is doing a campaign, they know to put people from, different backgrounds, sexualities and everything. That's great, because that's what representation is. But really, the representation and where it matters is behind the scenes. It's the people that sit on boards that make the decisions. I mean, we've seen it where a few brands have gone viral for a campaign that was really tone deaf. I think Pepsi got in trouble once. I think H&M, they got in trouble once for something that came across as really tone deaf. And then you think, well, the reason why these things, because in your head, you're looking at something and then everyone kicks off about it because it's like, how did you get to that point where nobody on the team thought, you know what, I think this is inappropriate? And those things tend to happen because the people who do make the decisions that sit at the top do all look kind of the same. So they know what to do in terms of putting people forward to represent their brands or their campaigns. But really the diversity that's needed the most is within the people that work behind the scenes that make the decisions. So I think what I found when I was coming up as a stylist, I think I met one deputy fashion editor of a magazine, but other than that, there wasn't really. And I also noticed that unless you kind of knew people or you spoke a certain way or looked a certain way, then it was a bit harder. And I remember doing radio as well. And it was always quite typical. They came from the same background, sort of middle class, same race, same sort of connections kind of thing. And then their careers would just sort of skyrocket. And I felt like I would have to work 10 times harder just to get even half a step to what they would. So then when COVID hit, I was getting to the point where I felt, do you know what? I'm exhausted. Like I've put in so much graft and I can see other people are doing way much better than I am, not because they're better than me, for sure. And like, I knew it wasn't that, but I was like, look, these are immutable characteristics that I can't change what background I'm from or whatever in order to get to the top. So I thought, you know what, I don't need this. It was several years after working in the industry that I thought, you know what, and I'm quite proud and happy to where I got. I did loads of amazing work. I worked with some incredible people. And even sometimes I think, wow, I actually did it. I always wanted to work in fashion, always wanted to be a stylist, and I did it. And I got a fashion editor role, and I did, lots of red carpet and working with different celebrities and people in the public industry and models. And I'm really proud of the work that I've done. But there is a part of me that thinks, if certain things were not an issue, where would my career have gone? Like, I think I probably would have stuck to it a lot longer. I think I would have gotten a lot further. And that is just the truth. And that is just, I know that firsthand. So yeah, I've definitely seen experiences where I've worked with people and then they've been handed opportunities that I would have thought that I would have deserved, being that I was there before them, I worked harder than them and all the rest of this.
Hi there. If you're enjoying this episode and want to further expand your thinking and develop your leadership, I've written a book that you might find useful. It's called Beyond Discomfort: Why Inclusive Leadership is So Hard and What You Can Do About It. The book is framed around a new model of inclusive leadership which explores 4 belief systems and offers pause for reflection on how you view diversity, equity and inclusion, or DEI for short. You'll gain new perspectives of some of the knotty DEI concepts, learn about the experiences of others who may be different to you, and develop an appreciation for alternative truths. Whether you're new to DEI or have spent many years developing your knowledge, whether you're a business leader or DEI practitioner, my book offers a comprehensive learning opportunity. It gives you tools, tips and advice to lead beyond discomfort, both individually as a leader and how to create systemic inclusion in the workplace. So if this sounds useful to you, check out the information in the show notes and click on the link to get your copy of Beyond Discomfort. Back to the episode. You mentioned something there, which is some of the faux pas that a couple of the top brands have made. And there have been other incidences where designers and brands have been criticised by their designs being influenced by different cultures, different ethnic cultures.
Right.
They use certain cues or motifs in the design to bring into the fashion world, but they're doing it in a gimmicky way. They're doing it to sell more.
Right.
And that's known as cultural appropriation. It's something, obviously, that is not okay, is discriminatory. It's the line in the design world, being respectful of another culture and being really just wanting to embrace and spotlight the beauty of the fashion of another culture and bringing it into your designs in a respectful way versus the cultural appropriation, which obviously is considered racist.
Yeah, because and there was something that happened quite recently. I think it was a magazine, and it was like a group of white women, and I think they were on holidays, and they were wearing saris. And then they said, "Oh, this is like the new summer chic," and they called the look everything under the sun except for what it was. And it was interesting because it wasn't with brown women who that is their cultural wear, and they didn't call it what it was. There was nobody who look like that's their traditional wear, and they sort of made it into, oh, this is like a new trend, and it's very chic, and this is very boho, and rightly so. There was a lot of backlash off the back of that, and you're thinking absolutely, because and I think that's where the problem lies, is that, because I don't think there's anything wrong with, showing, like you said, showing appreciation. We live in such a diverse world now. Of course, we're going to be influenced by other cultures. And, from the food we eat, we have diverse friendship. We have more access to other people's cultures. So I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody wearing something from another culture. And it's not so much the people that wear it that are the problem. It's when it goes mainstream, and then the magazines that print it, and then they'll put certain women on a pedestal and call them, oh wow, like they are the pioneers of this long existing trend that has been existing for thousands and thousands of years in certain cultures, never been appreciated before, never been put in the mainstream. And the women or men who, traditionally wear these cultural and, wear, they don't get celebrated. They're not on glossy magazines being called the trendy. It's the same theme all the time. It's like there's still a look, put it on somebody who they feel more comfortable, because I suppose they believe that the audience would feel, and it just doesn't even work that way. People would appreciate, because that's how we love different cultures, because we appreciate it on other people. But I think when you steal it and you rename it, rebrand it, don't even give the credit as to who it came from. It's incredibly disrespectful. It's incredibly tone deaf. And it's an example of racism. And people often think of racism as like negative words that you could say about another person or somehow discriminating, but actually cutting people out of their own traditions and their own culture and then giving it to somebody else and giving them the credit and then celebrating them. That is racism. So where do you draw the line? I think celebrate the culture and involving the people from said culture and making it a trend. Don't try to whitewash it to make it palpable for an audience so that other people can because I remember, I think the same thing happened with like a hair trend. And I think there was like, oh, and I think it was Kim Kardashian or something, and she wore some Bantu knots or something, or some and they called them boxer braids, which is not the name, and it was like, oh my God, this is like so cool and so chic. And so they've never put a black woman with braids on their magazines to say, oh my God, this is a cool trend. And then I remember one well-known sort of black radio DJ, she was invited to an event where they were doing people's braids. And she said on the advert, so she said she went on their Instagram page and not one woman was brown or black or looked remotely like her. And it was all, it was completely whitewashed. And she was like, no, I'm not going to be a part of this because you want me to now come and co-sign it to look like I agree with this. However, you've completely appropriated a culture. You've not given the credit where the credit is due. And now you want to capitalize on other people's hard work and, innovations. And we see that a lot. But I think the good thing again with social media is people don't take it lying down anymore. Before you can get away with so much and just complain with your friends having a coffee. Whereas now, no, people be verbal. It will go viral. It will be a conversation piece. And
yes.
And people will learn them the lesson a lot quicker.
Yeah. It's so clear, I think, how you've just articulated the difference between the two. And I think a lot of industries, I mean, we're obviously talking about the fashion industry here, but a lot of industries can learn a lot from translating that fashion example to their own. I'd love to now, move the conversation to wellness and particularly women's wellness, but highlighting so many high-profile celebrity women who have been in the spotlight for their fashion, who are there on the big screen, who we admire at a younger age, and who are now really being quite vocal about what happened to them as they aged, as they entered their 40s, as they went through the menopause, and some of them really experiencing some tough menopause transitions, as well as when they were pregnant, and how that the fear of losing out on roles. And whilst we're talking obviously fashion industry, I think the movie industry and the TV, it's a similar space where what you look like really matters. But there's something here, isn't there, about the toxicity of that culture, which is around women needing to cover or be silenced for what's going on for them from a wellness, as something completely natural like the menopause, going through that process and fear of being cancelled as a result. Can you speak a little bit to that and what has caused that initially, and then what do we do about it?
Yeah, and I think because we know, and ageism is something that I don't think we speak about enough. And I think of course it can affect men as well, but it mostly does affect women. And when we think of women, we think of, being maternal and being, as, childbearers and stuff. And so a lot of times your worth as a woman is placed on your ability to reproduce, essentially. And so when it comes to menopause, because we know that menopause is typically something that happens to you in your sort of late 40s to 50s, it can happen a lot earlier or a lot later, but round about then. And so it's kind of, as a woman, it's like there's a deadline to your worth and your youth.
Yes.
And it's like, well, after you get past that point, it's almost like you've run your course kind of thing. You're no longer seen as maybe as attractive or as sexy or as wanted by the general public, or, and all those things that are very superficial. And so as a woman, as you get older, because it's engraved in you from a young age, you know that menopause is the change, and that change is physical, it's psychological. I'm no longer of childbearing age. I'm an older woman now. And of course, it can affect your roles and things. And this is because you go through the physical changes of menopause. We know that, and it varies from woman to woman. For some women, it's not that bad. For a lot of women, they go through so many changes that do affect their day-to-day life. It affects their moods. It affects them physically, emotionally, all of it. And I think now, because you were talking before about women who have been in the public eye from a young age and now they're getting older and the conversations being had, which I think is incredible. One person that I can think of, somebody who for as long as I can remember, from as little as I can remember seeing on my TV screens, is Davina McCall. And she's been doing so much now about menopause, because now, yes, she's been in the industry for so long. And I think she's one of the most incredible women in terms of being at the forefront, because she's very fit. She's very active. She looks incredible. And she's one of the most successful TV presenters in our generation. And she's really opened up our conversation about how menopause has affected her and how it's a conversation that we don't talk about a lot. And I've done some work with, I've done some panels where we're talking about sort of menopause and how society views women and why is it that is so taboo and so taboo to talk about. And it's a little bit like periods. Periods are quite taboo to talk about. And, the changes that women go through on a monthly, like every month, like clockwork, your mood is going to change. You're going to go through pain. Your hormones are going to be all over the place. When it comes to women, we're seen as the ones who, and I think it is because we do bear children and give birth, which is like probably the most painful thing that anyone can go. I've never gone through it, but I'm sure you and other women can attest to that it's one of the most painful,
I can vouch for that.
Physically challenging. Yeah, right. Challenging thing you can do. So it's almost seen as that. Yeah. It's like, because you can do that, then women are just strong by nature. And if you can give birth, what's the period? Everything else is seen as minor in comparison. But to be honest, you'd rather give birth 2 or 3, 4 times and then it's done. But something like your period or menopause, these are things that are ongoing consistently. When you're done with your periods every month, then you go into menopause. And this is a massive chunk of your whole life. So until the first 50, 60 years of your life, your hormonal changes are going to affect you in one way or another. From the time you're a teenager, and now it's even earlier, even preteens are starting their period, all the way up until you finish menopause. That's your entire lifespan practically, where you're having changes that affect you. Your hormones are changing, your moods are changing, but we don't speak about it. And then, when we talk about inclusivity and diversity in the workplace and how women are viewed, and if you're a woman with a strong opinion, she must be in a period, she must be menopausal, and all these kind of things and so what you find is that women try to make themselves smaller, even though they're going through all sorts of changes. I mean, I can speak for myself. When I have my periods, it's the worst thing. Like, my moods are all over the place, but I'm so conscious of the way if I'm in like a work scenario and I'm on my period, I try to, I'm very conscious of the way that I am, because I know I'm that little bit more snappy, and I don't want people to think, she's aggressive, or it's a hormonal thing. But you just know that as a woman, how you present yourself, you're always going to be, it's never enough. You're either too meek, too mild, or you're too aggressive, too forward. And it's that kind of thing. And then when you do go through something like the menopause, it's going to affect your day-to-day life. And let's say you are, an actress or somebody in the public eye whose job is really stressful. You're working 13, 14, 15, 16-hour day shifts, having to remember lines, having to, there's not a lot of space to have even 5 minutes to yourself. I mean, I've filmed shows I remember with one of my colleagues, and she was going through the menopause, and was filming like a 16-hour day, and it was 4 days back to back. And she really, really struggled. And it was but she didn't, we had that conversation between me, her, and somebody else. And we just had that within her, but she didn't speak to the producers or the directors about this, because there was a lot of shame attached to that. And she thought, well, if I speak about this, maybe they'll judge me, or
they'll find someone else.
Yeah, they'll find someone else who's not going through that, who can turn up and be, on the ball, so to speak. And so this really affected her. So she just had to soldier through all of this. And it was very, very difficult. And I could physically see how difficult it was for her to go through a 4-day, 16-hour days of filming. And I was like, why don't you speak to this person, that person? And she really was adamant she didn't want to speak, because it's just not something that's spoken about. And I think if it was, then things would be put in place, and people would understand that you just need to make adjustments like anyone else is going through anything, whether it's a physical disability or anything else. The workplace does have a duty of care to put things in place for people to be able to do their work and not, and still participate in society and do the things that they love, even though they're going through some, health changes. And I think it's all about opening up the conversation. And like you said, there are many women who are now going through it and they're being very vocal about it. And these are women who, are poster girls and they're still seen as sexy and admirable and all these things, but they're going through it. And it's incredible for younger women who will at some point inevitably go through that journey to know that, oh, okay, I can understand why I feel this way and I can prepare myself. But when nobody speaks about it and there's shame attached to it, then you just suffer in silence. And a lot of women did and still do. So I think it's important that we continue that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And there are some really high profile women now talking very openly and sharing their experience and being very clear that this isn't okay. Why are you asking me questions or pointing about what I look like? What has that got to do with the conversation we're having right now? Meryl Streep's brilliant. Jennifer Aniston's, out there talking about it. She's fantastic. I mean, there's just so many women now who, really high profile since in their younger years when they were really put on a pedestal
for their
beauty. Yes, that's it, isn't it? How they now are talking about it. I think that's really going to see the shift that we need, at least to have some openness.
Yeah, right. And, men don't suffer from the same, judgment. No one's asking Brad Pitt or Leonardo DiCaprio about their looks, and it always falls on women. And it's like your worth is tied to your physical attributes. And it's like, no, we need to move away from that. And, these are professional women. These are successful women, brilliant actors and actresses. And and you go through all that work, put in all that effort, achieve all these incredible things. And then everything in the end is reduced to how you look. It's so soul destroying. And I'm so glad that women like that are standing up and saying it's not okay. Like, I've got more to bring to the table than my looks. And it's not okay.
Exactly. Hi, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Why Care. I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you more about the work we do at Avenir. We have a global team of DEI facilitators and coaches with a collective purpose to create a world where everyone feels like it was designed for them. We do this through our signature Inclusive Leadership Programme, which includes a cutting-edge online simulation tool, sponsorship programs, intersectional talent development programs, and workshops that generate new and powerful conversations at all levels of organisations. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, please drop me a note either via our website or through socials. I'd love to hear from you. Back to the episode. 56 Dean Street is where you've worked for some time. How long have you worked there?
13 years?
Yeah, 13 years. A long time. And maybe you could just talk about the work you do there, because I'd like to move on to the work you do in sex education now. And particularly, you've got a very clear purpose around supporting young girls from certain socioeconomic backgrounds who might have less access to this information and knowledge. So tell me a little bit about the work that you do, but specifically, what is it about that, the sort of the young women, young girls in this lower socioeconomic background who need that extra support?
Yeah, so within about, I'd say the first couple of years when I started at Dean Street, because we do so many outreach services tailored to specific groups. So we do a lot for gay men, trans clinics, sex workers. And so when I started, what I really wanted to do, because I love young people, I feel like I connect with young people really well. So we had a service called the Young People's Clinic. And for a few years, I was the lead nurse for that. So what I would do is I would go once or twice a week, and I think it was a Wednesday, a Tuesday, and a Friday. And that clinic was, because there was a few schools around there, and a lot of the children that went to the school were from lower socioeconomical backgrounds. And so less likely to access services, more likely to be, especially young girls, more likely to be groomed within gangs and things like that. So I was really passionate about working with that specific demographic. And so, I'll go and I'll do my clinic twice a week. It was a drop-in clinic, and then they'll come to me. We do outreach. I do outreach services in the local schools around. And I used to do a drop-in center at the local community center where like the young teenagers would hang around there. And for me, that was the most rewarding part in all the sort of work that I've done within sexual health. Because I think young people are, they're so inquisitive. And especially now, I think they're a lot more sharper. And I know there's been talk in the media about looking at sexual health for young people. And I think the government was saying they were going to scrap certain elements and things like that. And I think it's a shame, because young people now need comprehensive sex and relationship education more than ever. When we grew up, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have a phone where you're exposed to so much information, misinformation, stuff that you're not even looking for.
Yes.
Think of TikTok, the amount of stories that you hear of, and it doesn't even matter how many restrictions you can put on there. Somehow things get filtered through and young people are exposed to all sorts of things. And nobody's trying to explain this to them. And we're not adapting the education so that it's in line with the current needs of young people now. And when you think about the internet and things like internet grooming of young people, we hear these stories, we see them on the news, we see them on social media, we know that it's a thing, but where's the safeguarding for young people? And for me, I think it starts in the communities. First and foremost, it starts at home, but also not everybody comes from a background where sex is spoken about. Most people don't have that conversation at home. I know I never had that conversation at home.
I didn't.
And again, it's because our parents didn't have those conversations and their parents didn't. And so it's just all passed down.
Exactly.
And it's not to vilify and put blame on the parents. It's just, you know what you know. And if your parents didn't speak about it, you feel naturally awkward to have certain conversations. And I think we need to have more public campaigns. I think we need to open up that conversation. We need to look at, the dangers that young people do face, not just in schools, but social media. When you were younger, you'd be able to go to school and even if you didn't have the best experience, you could go home and home was like a safe haven, disconnect a little bit. You don't have that anymore. It's on your phones. There's group chats, there's Snapchat, there's TikTok, and there's all these things. And, nobody's trying to look at how we can make all these spaces safer for young people and how we can better educate young people about the dangers of grooming, what that might look like, people talking to you online, making, and just making young people more aware and also giving them the confidence and the language to be able to know their bodies, know body autonomy, talk to them about things like consent, how to, whistle blow, how to talk to an adult that you can trust if you feel unsafe, whether it's online or at home or anywhere. And so when I would do my clinic, that was a great thing because I built this rapport with the young people. So we look forward to, and this was when I was I was in my mid-20s at that time. And I looked a lot younger than what I did. And I would dress a certain way strategically. So they'll always be able to see themselves in me. So they'll be like, oh my God, Miss, I love your trainers, or I love your, And so you build that kind of relationships. And I loved it because they would then, share so much with me. And then I would be in a position to put safeguarding things and then be able to talk to the teachers, and then who can escalate it to the school. But I think, we need more. And unfortunately, that clinic, because of, I think, budget cuts or whatever, and that was quite some time ago. And so that clinic, I don't think that service runs anymore. But these are the kind of things that I'm doing outside of the clinic and things that I want to do outside of the clinic because I saw how beneficial it was to young people and how well received it was. And it was just an open space and it's specifically young girls for them to talk about, dating, boys. Sometimes it couldn't even be, it could just be about school, what subjects they like, what they were struggling and through just normal day-to-day conversations, you learn a little bit more and then I'll unpack certain things and learn that, okay, she's speaking to a boy, but he's pressuring her to send pictures of, nude photographs, and then we'll have that conversation. And then I'd be able to intervene where it was appropriate, and speak to her. And then it will give them that confidence to know that actually, if I don't feel comfortable doing something, I don't have to. And just sometimes I just need somebody to give them that confidence and to know that you are so young. You've got your whole adult life. This phase in your life is so short. Never, and you just kind of have those conversations. So for me, being the lead nurse for that service was, to this day, I think my favorite part of my job and my career was doing that.
I can imagine how rewarding it is when you are able to have that conversation that they wouldn't have with anyone else and be able to support them and make sure that they're safe. Just in terms of the work that you're doing in Uganda, because I'd love just to kind of, it is connected to this work that you've just spoken about. What are you doing in Uganda and what's the sort of the charitable things that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so I've been going back and forth to Uganda for the past, I'd say 2 years. And I met a friend of a friend who works as a publicist. And he started following me on Instagram and he saw all the work that I was doing here with, doing a lot of sex education and things like that. And he knew that I was from there originally. So he was like, you know what, Sarah, I love what you're doing. I think there's such a big hole in the market in this space within Africa as a whole, but in Uganda, and there's nobody talking about sexual health. There's nobody talking about relationships and dating and the perils and the trials and tribulations of all of that. And I think if you were to come here, you'd be able to do loads of work. So it was never something that I aimed at doing. It was kind of somebody opened up my eyes to the idea that was even a possibility. Because if you think about, different cultures, and especially in African cultures and a lot of Asian cultures as well, these things are completely off topic. Like, you don't talk about these things when it comes to sexual health.
Taboo.
Yeah, completely taboo. And so the idea of talking about sex education in Africa, it was never on the menu.
I get that.
Yeah. And I think that was probably showing my ignorance in a way, because ever since then, so what I do now, every 3 to 4 months, I go to Kampala, do work. There's a charity that I work with called Reach a Hand, and it's all about, reproductive health and supporting particularly young women and girls and boys as well, especially within rural areas who can't access sexual health services and health services in general, things like sanitary towels and all these kind of things. And they're called Reach a Hand. So they asked me to come and be the keynote speaker for an event for them last year. I went over there and I did that, and I'm working with a few of the universities there, and they have such incredible students who are pioneering better sex education and relationship education out there. And so I'm working to support them, but also at the same time open up those conversations within TV and media. So when I'm out there, my PR will set up interviews with me with podcasts and news channels and, magazine interviews, newspaper articles. And what I must say is I've been quite positively surprised by the feedback that I've got. And I thought there'd be a lot of resistance in terms of what I can and can't say. Backlash, yeah. I was really surprised. A lot of the TV networks, a lot of the radio stations that I've gone to, they're like, wow, we've never, and I think maybe it's because I'm coming from abroad that they probably might take it a bit more seriously, and they're thinking, oh, and again, going back to what we were saying in fashion and representation and seeing somebody that looks like you, whose name you can identify with or whatever. And I think that message coming from, because I think oftentimes when sort of sex education is coming from abroad to Africa, often it's from people who don't look like them. And so they kind of feel like, well, who are you to come and tell us what we should be doing? And it's kind of come from that perspective.
Totally.
So when it comes from someone like me who has a foreign accent to them, but looks like them, I think the message is received a bit better. So I've just noticed that they're just a lot more positive, and no one tried to filter what I say, and I've been quite open. And yeah, and I can see, even with the type of questions that I'm asked, I can see that, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of, equity and diversity within Africa, and doing that in a way that they can understand and that's respectful for the culture there as well. And it's just raising awareness. So it's very similar to the work that I do here, which is all about opening up conversations about not just sex, but everything that falls under the umbrella of sex and sexual health, whether we're talking about periods, whether we're talking about the dating scene. I mean, I've worked with dating apps. I work with Tinder. I work with Badoo. I work with a few dating apps where we open up our conversation about, why is it so hard for people to connect now? How is the internet and social media revolutionized the way we date? The positives, the negatives, how we can go back a little bit to how we used to be, because that was a lot harder. So just all these conversations that fall under the umbrella of sexual health, and then the mental health element of it, and how dating and sex and all of these things can affect our mental health, our body image, and how that has an impact on our general health and well-being. So I think what's great now, and even in Uganda and over here as well, I think people are now starting to look at sexual health and sexual wellness as part of general wellness. It's as natural as breathing. And, it's something that doesn't matter what walk of life you're from, what background, everybody has sex. This is how we all here, There's no restrictions as to who you can relate to, because we all need that. We all need that education, that safe space to be able to talk about it. And so I'm really grateful and humbled of the reception that I've had from people in Uganda, and especially within the media. Everyone's super supportive. And then my work over here is still, of course, ongoing, and, working on a few projects now. And yeah, it's just, I think it's time that we normalize certain conversations.
Yes. Yeah. So my final question is something I've been asking all my guests at the moment in this season, and that is around the topic of beyond discomfort, which is the title of my book. And I'm interested in when maybe there's a story or an example you can share, have felt discomfort related to diversity, equity and inclusion related that has made you stop and think, and you recognise, actually, hang on a second, maybe I do hold a bias here, or maybe there's something I need to work on here?
Yeah, when it comes to bias, I think we all have to recognize and acknowledge that we all do hold bias. Let's say communication is like something, just like in 90 or something, don't quote me, but a massive percentage more non-verbal than verbal. Apparently, I remember reading a statistic that said, we decide about people within like seconds of meeting them before they've even spoken.
Yes.
I've seen bias in so many different ways. And I think because I've worked in so many different industries, whether it's in fashion or in sexual health, I remember we had a contributor on the sex clinic once, and they were paraplegic, and they had a variety of challenges, physical challenges and disabilities. And they were a contributor. And I remember thinking, disability is an umbrella term, and there's so many disabilities, but with that extreme of physical disability, and they came as contributor. And I remember thinking, because part of the show was people would come in, they'll tell their stories about, with their relationship, and we get a little bit of a background story about them. And then the last bit was we do a sexual health screen. And that was a full-on screen. Like, if you're a woman, you're stirrups, we're looking inside, we're doing swabs. If you're a man, we're looking, proper health investigation. I remember thinking, how is it going to look like in terms of doing an examination, what type of sex they would have had, and all the rest of it. And again, they were paraplegic and they had other health disabilities and challenges. So in my head, I was wondering what type of test that I would do. So even with myself, I think, that was a bias when I think about it, because in my head, I almost assumed that, they won't need this test, or they couldn't possibly need that test. But by the end of it, they needed almost everything, and again, it's something that I've never seen a patient is within that position. But I remember having to stop myself in my tracks and thinking, and telling myself not to assume that somebody of a certain disability might not be able to have this particular type of sex, or that may not engage in this, or may not want this, and that was all based on, the physical, what was presented to me. For me, when I look at it, that was something that I had to pull myself up on and think, no, actually, don't assume that just because somebody may not be able to do X, that they don't want to do or are not able to. That's something that stands out.
Yeah, and I get that. It's all about exposure to difference, isn't it? Because at that point, you hadn't been exposed to someone who was paraplegic or with all of those physical disabilities. You hadn't had to consider or think about it.
Yeah.
So it's so powerful, that story, just to kind of know, well, actually, it's a great way of demonstrating how important it is to get people's story, to better understand them, particularly if you haven't been exposed to someone with their diversity characteristics. Allow what they tell you to shape your own view.
Coming from them and not my preconceived ideas.
Exactly. I could carry on talking to you for ages, but I know you have to shoot off because you've got clinics to get to. I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. If people do want to get hold of you, what are the ways in which they can do that, on socials and otherwise?
Yeah, so on all my socials, on Instagram, on TikTok and X, it's all at Sarah.Mulindwa.
Thank you for offering so much of your career, of the insights into sexual education, into the work you're doing in Uganda. Gosh, you're incredible. And I'm so delighted to have had you on the show and to talk to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Nadia. Honestly, I had the best time, and I could do another hour if you had let me. So thank you so much for your time and for having me.
That concludes episode 45 of Why Care. I can't believe how much we covered in that conversation. What I love about Sarah is her willingness to venture into discussing topics such as sexual health and menopause that many people find uncomfortable. Yet we know when they go unspoken can be harmful from a health and well-being perspective, if not life-threatening. Thank you, Sarah, for all you're doing to keep these conversations going. Do let Sarah and I know what you thought of today's show. You can find me on LinkedIn and Insta with the handle at Nadia Nagamootoo. As always, I really appreciate your support of this podcast through leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening and spreading the word by sharing it with your friends and family. Huge thanks to Maro at Kenji Productions for editing this podcast and Jenny Linton for getting it out there on social media.